Madam Speaker, it's an honour to rise in the House of Commons to speak to Bill C-9, an act to amend the criminal code with respect to hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religious or cultural places. I will be splitting my time with my dear friend, a member of Parliament for Bowmanville, Oshawa North. Gardner and Voltaire, one English journalist, another French satirist. A.G. Gardner, in his essay On the Rule of the Road, put it plainly: your freedom ends where the other person's nose begins. Your right to swing your fist ends when it collides with another's safety. To live together, we accept this social contract, curbing certain impulses so that everyone may move freely. Gardner used simple ideas like the limits of playing a trombone at midnight to illustrate the point. True freedom comes with the responsibilities of restraint, rules, and tolerance. Without responsibilities, liberties clash and dissolve into anarchy where no one is free. With these responsibilities, we achieve freedom for all, including our minorities. Voltaire, in his writings and satire, came to the same truth from another perspective. For him, freedom of speech was a lifeblood of progress. A society advances when ideas, even unpopular ones, can be expressed and tested. He fought censorship, knowing that suppression is always the tool of tyranny. The phrase often attributed to him, which was, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," was in fact penned later by Evelyn Beatrice Hall. Voltaire defended free expression while rejecting incitement, libel, and sedition, insisting that open dialogue is the only safeguard for liberty. Taken together, Gardner and Voltaire remind us that freedom lives in the balance in between. Without restraint, it collapses into anarchy. Without expression, into tyranny. It is against this balance that we must measure the state of our country today. Taking into account the understanding that Gardner and Voltaire provide us with, let's chart out Canada in the last decade and provide three principal critiques to Bill C-9. The hate crime legislation before us right now is one that we should have been debating several years ago. We will take no lessons from liberals when it comes to fighting hate. Let's talk about this last decade. Since 2015, when they took office, hate crimes have gone up 258%. Police-reported hate crimes have increased 6 years in a row. Anti-Semitic hate crimes are up 416%. We have a government in place that has allowed Jewish Canadians, who account for less than 1% of our population, to become the most targeted minority in our country. 70% of all hate crimes targeted on less than 1% of the population. This is a government that for far too long has decided to place political expediency over moral clarity, choosing appeasement over principle. A synagogue firebombed twice in 1 year. 2 Jewish schools shot up. A bomb threat targeting Jewish institutions across Canada. A Jewish man assaulted in a Montreal park. A Jewish woman stabbed in the kosher section of an Ottawa Loblaws. The government's announcement on the eve of Rosh Hashanah to grant a state to those who practice state terror as statecraft, emboldening mobs and violence upon our Jewish communities, is just the latest example. It has been a decade of waiting for the rule of law over mob rule. Christians across our country have been subjected to over 100 church bombings and attacks. Communities are divided against one another as political projects of liberals rather than as a country being raised on the basis of the rule of law for all its people. Truckers took to our streets to protest for their rights and freedoms, as this Prime Minister then betrayed civil liberty and sowed distrust in our financial institutions, calling those very protesters seditious. Seditious, Madam Speaker. Trust is broken in this country. Our institutions, whether media, bureaucratic, judicial, financial, academic, have all been subjected to radical conformity, not critical thinking. The rot of one ideology as supreme against all others has shaken the confidence of Canadians. And restoring that trust requires much more than the performance art and virtue signaling that much of Bill C-9 presents. The same Liberal members of Parliament that stood and watched as trust eroded, as communities were torn apart, stand here today to claim that they have solutions for the very problems they caused. They claim they have majestically changed since their new prime minister took office. We cannot forget the damage and division they sowed, the trust they have broken. Madam Speaker, it is against this backdrop of rising hate and violence that the Liberals have caused I offer three principal critiques of Bill C-9. First, the removal of the Attorney General from the process of approving charges for hate crimes. The requirement for AG consent has long served as a safeguard against abuse and a means for accountability. By removing that oversight, the government risks giving unelected bureaucrats unchecked discretion over prosecutions, paving the way for radical ideological judges. As my friend, the member for Nanaimo Ladysmith, put it best on September 24th, and I quote, "Right now, our biggest problem is that enforcement is not consistent. Bail is virtually automatic, and charges are often dropped. Serious charges are plead down." That is where Parliament's attention should be, on stronger enforcement, on swifter prosecutions, and on support for victims. Unamended, this bill risks punishing the unpopular while the truly dangerous slip through. End quote. Second, a question of identity. Where the bill currently refers to the protection of identity, it shifts attention away from protecting individual dignity. This carve-out from free speech gives Liberals the opportunity to define what they don't like as hate speech. Identities and human association are complex and subjective, but the concept of the individual's rights and dignity are objective. Our laws should defend every Canadian against intimidation, harassment, and violence, not protect abstract categories that are open to interpretation. And third, another concern with Bill C-9 is its approach to defining hate itself. As drafted, and as the government indicates, the bill would codify the Supreme Court of Canada's definition of hatred as detestation or vilification. On its face, this seems consistent, but by removing the word extreme, the government lowers the legal threshold, enabling police to lay a multitude of charges with less scrutiny and less investigation. In practice, this risks opening the floodgates to inconsistent prosecution and litigation. This is the kind of overreach we've come to expect in the United Kingdom, but not here in Canada. Conservatives are the party of free speech, not the party of prosecuting those for whose speech we don't agree with. There's a lot at stake in Bill C-9, Madam Speaker. We must resist the left's troubling argument that words alone constitute violence. Words are words. Violence is violence. Conflating the two licenses the idea that real violence is a legitimate response to speech, a principle that is both dangerous and indefensible. The only correct response to offensive or hateful words is more words, more debate. If there has been a rise in hate in Canada, it is not because we fail to police speech. It is because we fail to police actions, barricading neighborhoods, assaulting members of religious minorities, burning down churches, shooting up synagogues, vandalizing our minority-held businesses. And because we have a government that sows division, pitting one community against another, that treats one speech as sacrosanct and the other as seditious. It is because our government does not have the resources to act, and because Liberals have created a justice system that lets offenders walk back onto our streets. The solution to violence is enforcement of the law by police and by courts, accountability for wrongdoers, and genuine condemnation by public officials, none of which we have seen. Bill C-9, as written, falls short. As hate crimes have risen across this land, successive public safety and justice ministers have failed to bring focus to the source of these crimes. They have failed to provide both legal and moral leadership to stand against the mob and call for civility in Canada that honors what Gardner and Voltaire had described. Without them, violent crimes go unchecked. It's time to jail the haters, not for what they say, but for what they do. Madam Speaker, Bill C-9 fails to strike the balance Canadians expect. Despite having had the support of Conservatives since the elections, Liberals only table a law now that essentially repurposes existing law and contributes very little to dealing with one of the biggest crises our country has to confront. We must confront hatred with the rule of law and of love of liberty. We must protect Canadians from violence, not expose them to arbitrary prosecutions. We must hold this government accountable for legislation that leaves our communities vulnerable. That is our responsibility. That is our commitment. That is the standards Canadians expect. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's perhaps look in the mirror here. The Conservative leader is associated with conspiracy theory convoy. He's used misogynistic keywords in his party's propaganda. He's associated with the alt-right extremist and white supremacist adjacent group Diagolon. His party spent years appeasing the Conservative Party base, bringing nothing to the table but division and conflict. So my question through you, Madam Speaker, is what responsibility does the Conservative Party and their party leader have for the growing hate and division in Canada?
Honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
The honourable member should actually look in the mirror. This is a government that has spent the last decade dividing Hindus and Sikhs against one another. This is a government that has failed to utter a single word of strength against a majority of hate crimes being leveled against less than 1% of our population. More than 70% of all hate crimes across this country are focused on less than 1% of this population. And over the last years, what has this government done? Accelerated the hate, poured gas onto the fire, where synagogues have been bombed, schools have been shot, communities have been threatened. Conservatives will take no lessons from liberals on what it takes to actually confront hate when they're the ones that have been promoting it all along.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I know my honourable colleague wasn't yet a member of this place or living in Ottawa during the convoy, but I don't think he fully recognizes how awful it was for local businesses, local residents not to be able to sleep, to have horns blowing all the time. We sat in this chamber not knowing if the trucks outside were loaded with explosives or not. I remember a call. No, we didn't. No one knew what was in those vehicles, and I was told by the RCMP that I needed an escort to get in and out of the building because my face was too well known, and I wouldn't be safe trying to get in this building. The buses weren't running, the taxis weren't running, and it wasn't safe to walk through a crowd. Does the honourable member really think that was an acceptable situation for Parliament?
The honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
I appreciate the question, but let me offer this. At the time, it's true, I wasn't in this chamber, and I didn't represent the great people of Calgary Heritage. At the time, I was a writer, a thought leader at a place called the Macdonald Laurier Institute. I happened to be in Ottawa at the time of the convoy protests, and I decided to take a look for myself to see exactly what was involved. I walked from one end to the other. I probably encountered a bit too much beer and weed for my taste, but I will tell you, this was a peaceful protest. These were authentic people fighting for their freedoms and doing so for the best interests of our country and our communities. The fact that they would be diminished by the farce of what had been opposed as an emergency act against them and against the freedoms of Canadians, freedoms that have been shaken in our financial systems for subjective enforcement of the rule of law, are all things that need to be confronted and never again permitted to happen.
Member for London Fanshawe. Okay, the honourable member, for Bowmanville, Oshawa North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question for the member from Calgary Heritage. I have heard from many members of Canada's Hindu community across Durham region concerned that through Bill C-9, the Liberal government is associating one of their sacred symbols with hate. Has the member from Calgary Heritage heard the same concerns?
The honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
I appreciate the question a great deal, and I thank the honourable member for his incredible work on restoring trust among our young people and trust between communities. The Nazi hooked cross was culturally appropriated from the ancient civilization of Hindus and Indians themselves. So people of Indian origin and Hindu faith have often seen that symbol as the swastika, as it's properly known, as a symbol of peace, of love, and of prosperity. When the Nazis culturally appropriated it and made it famous as a symbol of hate, they chose to do something terrible in this country. In how we speak about hate crimes and hate symbols, it is so important for us to learn this lesson of history, to classify the hooked cross by the Nazis correctly, and to defend our Hindu community and to defend our Hindu.
L'honorable député de Saint-Hyacinthe, Bagot-Acton.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe, Bagot-Acton. Madam Speaker, since we're talking about hate speech, does he agree with the religious exemption? Does he agree that parts of the criminal code about hate speech if it's based on a religious motivation, then there might be an exemption. People would be able to say these things with impunity. Does he think that's reasonable?
Answer from the honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
In the interest of time, I'm looking forward to discussing what these issues are with our honourable members and colleagues in the bloc, and I know we'll have an opportunity to do so in committee.